Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Straightforward, tough topic. Let's do it. 911 workers. What call stays with you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Here we go. This is my darkest call for help. Before becoming an EMT, I was a team leader for a lifeline service, emergency buttons for old people. In the UK, these can be linked to smoke alarms. A call came through for a smoke alarm activation in a house roughly 5 minutes away from our call center. All I could hear initially was the beeping of the smoke alarm. It was distorted because it was so loud. In the background, I heard a faint but panicked call for help and what sounded like the service user desperately asking for water. I obviously called the fire service. I kept the call open and listened as a roaring sound gradually got louder and louder. I could then hear a cracking and popping sound, probably from the windows. I'm not fully sure what I heard then, but it sounded like the man was faintly screaming and making gurgling sounds. After several minutes of listening to this and repeating instructions for him to get outside, I could hear respirators and the beeping of fire services radios. At this point, I decided to leave the call center being run by my colleagues and drive to the house. I thought they must have rescued him, but I was in denial about what I'd actually heard. Once I arrived, the fire service told me that they still hadn't found anyone. About an hour later, I was informed that they had found a body. This man was a wheelchair user. He was found next to his wheelchair by the back door, locked inside the house. I had to go to the coroner's court to explain my involvement. This is where I learned he was a smoker who regularly lit his cigarettes with matches. He also used a paraffin-based cream for his skin. It was believed he had lit a cigarette, dropped the match onto his knees, and accidentally set fire to himself. He had to be identified using his dental records. The cries for help and the noises of gurgling and screaming still haunt me to this day. I'm not even sure if it was him gurgling or just something else making a similar sound, but I can't get the image of what it looked like out of my head. This was about 3 years ago. I will never let myself forget this man. He taught me that you should never get emotionally invested in an incident. I've seen and dealt with an equally nasty situation as an EMT, but thanks to this gentleman, I can let go of the emotional baggage that comes with ambulance work. Former 911 operator dispatcher. I only did the job for a few months, but there are 2 calls that stick with me. Call number 1, the 911 terminal goes off and I answer. On the other end of the line, a woman screams, "He's R-ing me, please help." I tell her that she's just been R'd, as most people tend to report crimes as if they are just happening, when most times the crime has already occurred and finished. She screams, "No, he's doing it now." This woman is actively being R'd while on the phone. We get police dispatched and try to locate her, but her phone is pinging in the middle of a cornfield, and she's saying she's in an alley. Finally, after 10 minutes of listening to this woman being attacked, she gets away and gets to a house where we locate her. Her attacker got away. Call number 2. Due to a batch of heroin that was heavily laced with fentanyl coming out of Ohio, southern Indiana, had one of the worst nights for overdoses. Narcan was scarce. For 8 hours, we fielded an overdose call at least every 30 minutes. The one that broke me, though, came near the end of the shift. The 911 terminal goes off and I answer. On the other end, a 10-year-old boy states that his father is not breathing and turning blue. I ask if his dad was eating something or if he suddenly collapsed, etc. The boy states that his dad has a needle in his arm and he thinks his medicine is bad. I get the boy to unlock his door and the medical team and police arrive. Later, the officer who arrived let me know the dad didn't make it. I cannot tell you how horrible it is to listen to a child as they watch their parents overdose and die. To those of you thin yellow line workers still working the phone lines, thank you for being the voice on the other end of the line. I'm not an operator, but for 10 years I had to do a court-mandated class at a coroner's office. In this class, they have a recording of a 911 call placed by a lady whose husband had gotten so drunk that he didn't recognize his own wife in their home, so he grabbed a knife, thinking she was an intruder. Despite her pleading with him and calling his name, he ended up stabbing her to death. I want to say over 30 stab wounds. Her screams and begging her husband to remember were gut-wrenching. Eventually, she stops making any kind of sounds, and you can hear their young daughter come out of her room and call out to her, only to be met with silence. At that point, it's then you can tell the woman is no longer breathing. I will hear those screams and begs until the day I die. I work as a 911 operator now, and I have to say it's the calls we get every day that are seemingly dealt with in the sort of fashion you would expect. Domestic, police and EMS are sent, and the situation was taken care of. That sort of thing we get all the time. One time we get a routine call, a reckless driver passing people going way too fast. Pretty normal stuff in a small county. As I'm dispatching police to head over near the location, I get another one saying he is wrecked and that his car is on fire and he's trapped. I've taken 1,000 calls, but this one turned bad in the worst way. I could hear the man screaming as he burned alive. Fire and EMS couldn't get there in time, which makes me feel like I could have possibly been faster, but the man burned in less than 12 minutes. Also, he had just beat his girlfriend before this, so he hasn't lost sleep over it, but sure, there's a hell of a way to go. Not 911, but did distress marine radio in Alaska back before dangerous catch was a thing. I worked on many interesting cases involving serious incidents. The worst were the men overboard, since they had at most 5 minutes to get them back on board. One case I remember was that a member of the crew went down to the engine room and one of the guys was lying on the deck. They started CPR and called me on the HF radio. I patched in the duty flight surgeon so they could walk them through the CPR, but after 20 minutes, they were told they could stop. No one knew how long he had been down. The crew continued CPR for another 40 minutes before giving up. Rescue was not possible, as they were 400 miles from the nearest helicopter. Alaskan waters are a large and lonely place. The remainder of the call was filled with instructions from Alaska state troopers on what to do with the body, as they were at least 4 days from home port. The scary part for me was how isolated those guys are when they're out there. Yeah, when you work a job in a remote location, if there is a medical emergency, that's it. You got the people you're out there with, and that's all you got, so, man. Both involved children getting shot. One was me trying to reason with the mother who found her 4-year-old shot, accidentally shot himself, found boyfriend's gun. It took me a few minutes to realize she was actively driving her son to the nearest hospital while telling me everything. We had a separate EMS dispatcher on the line trying to get the ambulance to intercept her while my officers tried to do the same. The officer ended up finding her first and driving the kid to the hospital. The kid didn't make it. The other one was a witness watching a group of teenagers get shot at the common ground of an apartment complex. The shooter was in one of the higher level apartments and managed to hit one of them. My caller was hysterical and then refused to look outside after the kid was shot to get me any information, and I don't blame her. This one didn't scare me, but it left me in shock the next day. I was on the phone with a 20-ish-year-old who was holding onto a tree after being swept out of her car by floodwater. I worked with EMS dispatchers to locate her and get water rescue out to her. It took hours. This one frustrated me because I later found out she was TikToking the whole damn thing while telling us she was struggling to hold on to the tree. I couldn't believe it. Last I heard, she took the video down. My mom told me one call that bothered her for the longest time. The son was in a family of, I think, 6 or 7 other kids and a mom and dad. She calls in and is speaking so quietly, and in the background, All my mom said she heard was crying and what sounded like fighting. The kid said he was 6 and he was calling because his dad was hitting his mom, but his brother got into a fight with his dad because of it. My mom said she heard the kid scream and then the call ended. That little boy was able to tell her where he lived before the call ended, but by the time the police got there, it wasn't pretty. The other kids were beat pretty badly. The mother was out cold but survived, but the little boy who put in the call was beaten within an inch of his life. His face was all broken and bloody, and he wasn't responsive. They had to shoot the dad, and my mom never found out what started the whole fight. She told me that one hurt her, mostly because she felt it was the boy wasn't talking to her, he wouldn't have been hurt. She knew it wasn't her fault, but she felt bad for the boy. When she died a few years ago, that family found out where we were having her funeral, I think it's called, and they all wanted to say thank you one last time. My mom had a lot of crazy stories when she was a dispatcher, but that one hit her the most, and I know she would have cried tears of joy to see those kids alive and well. I'm not a dispatcher, but when I took on an abused kid for therapy for various reasons, I ended up listening to the 999 call their mother made. Long story short, Mom walks in to see the kid getting abused by the babysitter. Mom went mental and beat them unconscious in front of the child. Mom rings 999 and gives the full story. She knows from the second she walked in and hasn't asked the child any questions until police are present, because I can't guarantee I won't pick up a butcher's knife in the chopping block next to me and just hack them to bits and hide their bodies. She said that in the 999 call, calm as day. The entire call was really eerie with how calm Mom was, but you could hear the love she has for her child and her acceptance of whatever consequences were coming her way. There wasn't so much pride in her voice, but it was a tone of, I don't care what happens to me. I saved and protected my child after failing them. Come what may, I did my best by here, and I'd do it again. Altogether, it was a 15-minute call before police showed up, and the abuser woke up about minute 7, and that's when shit got, well, all you hear is her saying, right, you're going to want to tell the officers to step on it as XXX is coming around, and you can write off if you think I'm letting them out of this house other than with a police escort. Frantic typing for the dispatcher, trying to keep the situation calm when the abuser freaks the hell out, screaming, swearing, and threatening Mom, and suddenly you hear the mom struggling to breathe. It was obvious she was getting strangled when suddenly the abuser screams, then all goes silent except for gargling. Kid had snuck back in the kitchen where they were. At the sound of screaming, they saw the abused strangling Mom, so they grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed the abuser. I can't remember where, and in that moment they let go of Mom's neck, so Mom grabbed the knife and slit the abuser's throat. That phone call got Mom off of all charges on self-defense. I've heard a few dispatch calls in my line of work, which is unusual for therapists, but due to the cases I take on, there have been a handful that were deemed by the family to be suitable for therapy. But yeah, me and the dispatcher happened to know each other through our kids' school. And I said to them after I heard it that they wanted a few free sessions. I had time and was happy to sit with them due to how horrific the call was, and we became friends instead. I know this still occasionally gives them nightmares to this day, and we've been talking for a few years now, and to be honest, it does to me too sometimes. It's about 4 a.m. I hear the 911 tone drop in my ear, letting me know I'm about to be connected to a caller. The tone ends and I ask for the address of the emergency, only to be greeted by dead silence. I wait, close my eyes, and listen, and just as I'm about to ask again, I hear a small whimper. Help, help, please. She sounded to be about 5 to 7 years old and is almost whispering. She tells me the street is XYZ, but she doesn't know the number of her house. Sweetheart, I start, can you find a piece of mail and tell me the numbers? Her small, sweet voice puffs out that she can't. Her mother, who was just carrying her down the stairs, tripped and is now laying unconscious on top of the girl. She's now struggling to breathe and starting to panic that her mother isn't responding. Sweetheart, I coo again to remain consistent and sweet and hopefully soothe myself as well. Tell me what your house looks like. What color is it? What kind of car does your mommy have parked out front? The paramedics are on their way, but without knowing what house, it could be too late for her mom by the time they go around knocking on doors. A mother isn't supposed to die and crush her child post-mortem. Not on the phone, not tonight. She described it to me. I imagine the small brown house with the crooked trees out front. I imagine it like a child's drawing. Each word from her tiny voice a stroke of the crayon. She's doing a great job. I remind her over and over. I think someone's knocking on my door. Should I be scared? I don't know them. I let out a sigh of relief. I hear the firefighters bust down the door, but what I can't imagine is their faces, twisted into confusion at what they see. Flummoxed on the floor lies a 60-year-old woman with her walker on top of her. She's drenched in sweat. She lifts up her head, and a child's voice slides out between her wrinkled lips like something out of a psychological thriller film. This is Miss ABC. She has DID, dissociative identity disorder. Her mother died tragically when she was very young, carrying young Miss ABC in her arms and a new baby on the way. The young girl moved carelessly in her arms, and down they went. A crushed lung for the child, a broken neck for the mother, and a fetus never to be born. Now, every time Miss ABC falls, she slips back into when she was 4. She relives that tragedy and is trapped inside a body that feels wrong. She gets to relive her mother's death each time she takes a spill. She will relive this tragedy and feel the heartache and terror of a dead loved one 100 more times in her life, and it will always feel as terrifying as the first. I was a former dispatcher here when I was 22, now 27. I've got 2. One was of a call I heard in training. We were listening to a lot of famous and hopeless 911 calls that were particularly grave in nature. The trainer was trying to familiarize us with the concept of hearing tough things over the phone once we were done with classes. Well, she runs out for a second because a dispatcher on the floor busts out of the room crying. She comes back in about 15 minutes with a tape, a call that just came in. Basically, a toddler found his dad's gun and accidentally killed himself. The mother called it in. She's crying and screaming and just keeps saying my baby over and over again. In the background, the police have the father surrounded because he has the gun to himself. A few seconds pass and you hear an audible shot on the phone. The father couldn't live with himself and committed suicide. It was extremely tough to commit to the job after that, but I did. I'll never forget the way that woman screamed as her whole world collapsed in on itself. The second was one of my first calls after training. I answered the phone and a young kid said he wanted to report a murder. Nervous, I continued to ask him directions, and he gave me an address. Basically, he said he was playing video games at a friend's house, and someone he knew there killed his girlfriend and left her tied to the bed. He gives me the address, and I send the call over to our dispatchers. 15 minutes or so pass, and there's a structure fire at the same house. The boyfriend lit the house on fire after he killed his girlfriend. I stayed for about 7 more months and decided the job wasn't worth losing sleep over anymore. At 22, I thought I could use the money, but it wasn't worth the depression and alcoholism that followed.